JPI. If you are at UE currently studying, that would be great to let us know in the chat. So please let us know that. If you are already graduated, please let us know. So we just want to see some responses in the chat. You don't have to unmute or anything at this time. We just want to get an idea of our audience so we can cater our slides and our presentation accordingly. So if you can just share that in the chat, I'll give you a few moments to do that, and then we'll continue. So I'm already seeing those responses coming in. Thank you so much. So we have a first year at St. Augustine, UE. That's fantastic. I hope school is going well. You also have a second year mechanical engineer. Glad you can make it today. Those persons that are still don't have a chance, please share your information so we have an idea. We have a recent graduate from UE St. Augustine in civil engineering. Giving the others some time. University graduate, electrical engineering. Thank you for joining. So as those responses are coming in, I just want to highlight some rules in terms of how our session is going to go tonight to ensure that we're going to have a fruitful session for everyone that attends. So first of all, again, welcome to the Real World Engineering Webinar Series. This is a series that we're going to be hosting over the entire year, and our aim is to be catering to every single type of engineering that there is, especially depending on that demand. So of course, we have here some civil already, and we have electrical and mechanical. So any established professionals who are on the call and you ever want to do a webinar, that would be great. As it relates to how the questions are going to be, usually you would appreciate that the questions are going to be at the end, but we've changed that format for our webinar. And what we're going to do is that we have our speaker tonight. And if you see a question and you have a burning question and you don't want to forget it, all you need to do is either raise your hand so that way I can bring the speaker to bring it to his attention, or you can write your question in the chat and I'll be sure to ask that on your behalf. So if you're a bit shy and you don't know and you really want to have your question answered, just go ahead and put that in the chat and I'll be sure to ask that for you. Overall, throughout the webinar, though, I kindly ask that you keep your mic muted. We don't want that we can hear anything in the background because, as you can appreciate, it might throw the speaker off a little bit. So just keep your mic muted unless you're asked to turn it on. Other than that, please stay until the end because we do have some updates that we want to let you know about that is going to be coming for the year. And we also want to get your feedback on the webinar. So we have, again, one more response coming in lower 6 at the law school. So what we're going to do now, we've gotten some of the responses already. So we have a basic idea of our audience. We're going to start our webinar. So tonight, we actually have the first vice president of the Barbados Association of Professional Engineers, and that is Vincent Jones. He is a civil engineer who has an extensive amount of experience in construction. And we've asked him to join us tonight to give us an idea of what is it like really working with site teams and working with people when you go out there in the field. And as you can appreciate, when you leave school, there's a lot that we learn about the knowledge of the area, but then we have to actually work as a team, and we have to work as a team, usually in that supervisory position. And we really want to make sure that we're going in there with our best foot forward. So we have him here tonight, who is going to grace us now in the opportunity as a speaker. He usually is a moderator for webinars. So I'm thankful that he's able to be here to share all of his knowledge with us. Vincent, whenever you're ready.
Hi, and good night to everybody. Is everybody hearing and seeing me okay at this point in time? Um,
Can see you well.
Great, thank you. All right, well, good night to everybody, and thank you, Ria, for having me on as your guest in this kickoff webinar series that you'll be hosting. And I want to really welcome all of the persons who have jumped on the call tonight, especially those of you who may be student members or recent graduates, persons who are not yet members of BAPE. Certainly, we extend an invitation to you to join us either as a student member or if you are a recent graduate as a graduate member, please do reach out to Stacy at the office. So tonight, I've been asked to speak on this topic in real world engineering, and I'm about to share my screen. Um, just can everyone see my screen, please?
Your screen is good to go.
All right, good. So, my name is Vincent Jones, and just a slight correction, I am not a civil engineer. I am actually a construction project manager. And I have done a associate's degree from the community college in building and civil engineering. So that's my associate degree. I did a diploma in health and safety and welfare from Samuel Jackman Prescott Institute of Technology. And then my first degree, BSc, is in construction management from Heriot Watt University in the UK. So I'm actually by profession a professional builder, project manager, as it were. My affiliations in terms of professional affiliations are to the Barbados Association of Professional Engineers, Institution of Occupational Safety and Health UK, and the Chartered Institute of Building. I'm a chartered member there. In terms of my work experience, I've worked for Care International, which is a UK outfit. I've worked for Suarez da Costa, which is a Portuguese company. Both of those firms would have been working on the South Coast Switch project, different contracts at the time. I also worked on the Savannah Hotel with Care. I worked in Scotland with an Irish firm by the name of Lang O'Rourke, and they were building the Bank of Scotland World Headquarters at that time. So I did an internship there for a summer. And then when I came home to Barbados, I worked with the Jada Group as an assistant project manager, then a project manager, then a divisional head for 18 years. And over the last 3 years and 4 months, I've been working as a project manager construction for the Barbados Public Workers Cooperative Credit Union Limited. So that's a little bit about me and who I am. Tonight, we want to go through 5 lessons, as it were. Lesson one is going to be a practical day-to-day, some of the practical day-to-day realities that you may come into contact with as you start out on your engineering journey, working on a job site or in a factory setting. Some effective discussion among effective communication. Building mutual respect will be the third thing we'll look at, and managing conflict on the job site, number 4. And then number 5, learning from the trade professional. So, lesson 1, practical day-to-day realities of engineering site practice. Now, if you are fresh out of university, fresh out of school, this is your first job, and you're going on or walking on to a live construction or industrial site, whether that's a factory setting, industrial plant of some type, it is important, or what should really happen is that you should have a proper orientation before you actually start to do any work on that location. Now, a proper orientation would look like, let's give you what it's supposed to look like, where you would be given some site-specific safety overview of the job site you're working on, whether that is a construction job site or whether that is a factory setting, as I said, where in that overview you will be told where certain dangers and hazards are. Those will be identified to you. Some examples of that could be like overhead works with cranes, where you may have moving equipment on the job site, an appreciation of what type of equipment is there. There should be dedicated driveways and pathways, but if they're not, you need to be aware of what is moving around you on the job site. If there are live wires, excavations, unstable floors, demolitions, etc. You would appreciate that you are coming blindly into this setting, which is full of hazards. So you really should be made aware of what those potential hazards are to you. Your talk should also alert you to where the first aid points may be, rest stations, welfare amenities such as bathrooms, showers, lunch area, canteen, etc. What the evacuation procedures for these job site or the factory may be, where the office areas are if you're going to be partially in the office, the expected personal protective equipment that you will be wearing on site. Do you have to wear a helmet for this particular job? Is a high-vis vest required? Steel toe boots, those type of things. If you're going at height, do you have to wear a harness? Have you been given training on how to use that harness? Other things you may need to understand is if that particular job site has a permit to work system in place. Um, if you are working in the petrochemical industry, if you're working on an oil rig, if you're working certainly on a plant, they may have a permit to work system in place where certain aspects of work, so if you're doing hot works, welding, burning, those type of things, you may have a dedicated permit system in place where the permit is signed on at the start of every day, where the hazards are identified, the guys that are doing the work are briefed, the necessary controls are put in place. And then at the end of the day, that permit is signed off. And that is a control system that's put in place basically to that where persons who are supervising the work or managing the work would have gone through that particular job process, look at the hazards, identify what they are, put a plan in place as to how to execute the particular job, and then you put a permit in place which speaks to those hazards, how the job is to be done, who is to do the job, what equipment is to be used. So these are all new things you may be exposed to on that first day, first week on your job site or your industrial plant. You also need to understand the hierarchy, that site hierarchy that you're going to be working with. You need to understand where you fit into that site ecosystem. If you're starting off as a junior engineer, you will be the first round of junior management. So you'll be just in the hierarchy in theory, and I say in theory, you will be just over the foreman or the general foreman on that job site in terms of reporting. And you would then report to either a section supervisor, perhaps, or a section engineer if you're doing engineering works. You may report directly to a project manager, depending on the size of your outfit. So there may be different tiers within the site itself for reporting. So you need to understand where you sit within that hierarchy on that job site or in that factory setting. Also, getting to know your team is extremely important. Do you have a foreman or a supervisor that will be reporting or working along with you? Do you have a chainman? So if you're starting off in civil engineering, when I start on site, my first job was setting out and I was assigned a chainman. So that's for those of you who are not in the civil side, that would basically be an assistant who holds the staff when you're taking levels or using the field light or whatever have you. So do you have an assistant assigned to you? You need to know who that person is. And then you also need to understand if there are specific human resources that are meant to report to you. If you have a dedicated team that is working with you, you need to know who they are, and you need to understand what trades everybody within that team possess. So that you know what is the makeup of your team. If you are in a factory setting or if you're working at an electrical plant, likewise, you need to know the technicians or the various tradesmen that are going to be working with you, the electricians, fitters, whether they are laborers, what their specific job is, what they do, what they're supposed to be doing, and get an appreciation of what your team and how your team is comprised based on the work that you'll be required to do. Like I said earlier, knowing that role on site and your assignment is very important. It gives you a clear understanding of what is expected of you, who you report to daily, and who you are expected to supervise. Um, Also, one of the things that can happen to me, if you're fresh out of university, perhaps you did some summer jobs, but those summer jobs were primarily in an office setting. You didn't really go onto a job site. Coming onto a construction site, especially coming into a factory setting, if it's a large factory, especially, can be quite overwhelming. And you can feel quite daunted by that whole experience. So it is understanding from early what it is that you're going to be going into in terms of profession. If at all possible, try to make the most of those summers in getting jobs in various areas. So if you are a civil engineering student and you are still at university, my recommendation to you is every summer, if it is possible, and you can get a job in a different part of the profession that you're hoping to join, that would be my advice. So what do I mean by that? So maybe one summer you get an opportunity in a design office. Maybe the next summer you get an opportunity working on a job site. That way you get a full appreciation of both sides of the coin, because as a civil engineering professional, you will be required to do design in an office for periods of time, or you may be required to be on that job site, or you may be required to do both. Hi, Ria, you have a question?
Yes, I do.
Yeah.
So actually, the question I wanted to ask you, Justin, because I heard you mention the civil engineering students, and I know we do have some electrical and mechanical students and graduates on the call. And I'm curious, how do you find they might actually be having their role on a job site? Are they on job sites? If so, in what
Yeah, well,
capacity?
I was coming to them as well. I'm not going to leave them out
Okay,
because I
great.
am aware we have a mixed bag, as it were. So I use the civil engineers first because obviously that's what I'm more accustomed to. But if you are mechanical or electrically inclined and you are going into a factory setting, a generation plant, a oil rig, all these are areas as a yeah, electrical or mechanical person that you may be going to work in or on. Again, that can be very overwhelming. If you are working in the petrochemical industry, before you go step foot on a oil rig, there'll be extensive training, health and safety training, and otherwise that you have to undergo before you can go onto an oil rig. If you're working on an oil field, similarly, because of the dangers involved, again, there's extensive training. The petrochemical industry is probably one of those industries that have the highest amount of safety requirements in and around it. And obviously, we understand why, because a mistake could lead to your immediate death and the death of many others. Again, if you're working as a mechanical engineer, let's say you're working in a sugar factory with large moving motors and engines and rollers, boilers, electrical generating plants, you need to really have an appreciation of what is around you. But again, all of that can be daunting to you if you've not had exposure to it. So my recommendation is yes, it can be daunting, it can feel like a lot, but just take it one day at a time. Ask the questions, and just try to make yourself as knowledgeable as you can as early as possible so that you have a better appreciation of what is required of you. And that follows nicely into the next topic there, which is stress management. Early days on your first job or on a job site, whether that job site is a construction site, a factory, a rig, um, it can be very stressful because you are, in some instances, you may be working away from home. For some of you might not have studied outside of Barbados, and maybe your first time away from home, so that has a level of stress to it. You are now having responsibility placed on you, and you have people reporting to you, or you have timelines that you have to meet. And yes, you might have had timelines to meet at school, and there are consequences when you don't meet those timelines. But when you're in a working environment, there are also consequences, and the consequences could mean that you could get into some sort of challenge with your supervisor, or if it's severe enough, you may lose your employment. So the level of stress can be immense for some persons that are now starting out. Plus, you're getting to know all these new people around you. tradesmen of different ages and descriptions, sometimes of different nationalities and different cultures. So it's a really mixed pot of what you're exposed to, and that can be extremely stressful, managing that ever-evolving process, meeting those deadlines, and as I say here, managing humans. I think some engineers, if we could just sit in our offices and just automate everything, that would be the ideal scenario, right? But you do have to get out there sometimes and manage those humans, and that's where you get conflict, and that's what sometimes gives you the most stress out of everything else. You can sit down and work out the most challenging computation and feel a sense of achievement, but then you have to go out there and interact with a person who may just be extremely challenging to deal with. So that is something that you have to learn to manage. And how you manage that stress and finding ways of dealing with that stress is going to be very important for you being successful in your chosen profession. Okay, before I jump to lesson two, are there any questions, Ria, on lesson, the first one we went through so far?
So for those that may have come in a bit late, we are allowing questions in between versus a particular section. So if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat and I'll be sure to read them for you. Or it can be a case where you can raise your hand and be able to ask it on your own. And I encourage you to do that because, again, as we've heard so far, exposure is going to be very, very beneficial when it comes to this field. And you're going to have to learn to speak to people and interact with people as we're on teams. But giving you a chance, in case you have any questions, I'll first ask mine. I actually had my first question was on safety. I know you said you worked overseas. I know you mentioned Scotland. And I'm curious, what have you found to be the biggest difference between the safety expectations here in Barbados versus those overseas?
Well, the biggest difference is that when you work overseas or even in certain environments here, there are consequences to be had for the company. Overseas, those consequences are very serious because a company director can be prosecuted if somebody dies or if there's a serious accident or on their job site. So it is taken extremely well. I worked in the UK and it's taken very seriously there. Um, it's very seldom that a person who is at the higher end of the executive chain wants to go into a court and face the music. So the requirement is on them to make sure they're meeting the safety guidelines as set out by the laws in those particular jurisdictions. What's interesting is that several of those companies may have very stringent safety guidelines in their home countries, and then sometimes when they go to work overseas, they tend to relax a bit. However, if they're being audited externally, then they may bring that safety culture with them. And if you are accustomed working in a very relaxed safety environment, you're going to work for one of those companies on a project that they're doing in the region, you may find that the standard is pretty high. Also, certain industries, again, I mentioned the petrochemical industry earlier. Um, I think it was about 6 gas stations for Sol, and I was working for JADA at the time. And what I found was that at that time, the safety culture in the company I was working for was pretty basic and pretty relaxed. However, Sol, as a regional entity, they had very strict health and safety procedures that had to be followed, including permit to work systems. They had inspectors that were coming daily to check the works. So it was pretty regimented. And what was interesting is that having worked in that system, a lot of the persons that were exposed to it took the culture away because it was a change of culture for a lot of people because, like I said, they were not accustomed to having safety systems in place that they were required to follow. But then if you work on 6 gas stations after a while, you really start to take that culture on board, and that becomes beneficial in the long run because then when you go on other jobs, you tend to adopt that mindset, which is beneficial to you and beneficial to the job. But I would say, Ria, the major difference is the ability of the law to prosecute those issues of health and safety. We do have the Labor Department here, under which that responsibility falls, and you will see them turn it on job sites or in factories from time to time. So when they come, they will do their inspections, and they do have a very high level of authority, actually, almost on par. Not they don't have powers of arrest, but they have powers that they can enter and they can summon the police if they need to. That's something a lot of people don't realize. And if need be, they can shut a location down as well. So whether they use that power that they have is a different story altogether. So as Barbados becomes signatory to more international bylaws and these type of things, you may see health and safety law in Barbados begin to bite a bit more.
Thank you so much for that. And it actually leads me into one final question. I think I wonder in our mindset, we tend to think, well, nothing bad is going to happen. No one is going to prosecute us. We're going to be fine. But can you tell me briefly, why is safety important? And what are the bad things that could actually happen, whether it be on site or in a factory?
Well, safety is important because there are some pictorial diagrams and posters and stuff that you see a lot in the UK. And they normally will have a team of people and they will have one of those people blacked out and missing from the team. And basically the message in there is that you want everybody that comes to work that day to go home at the end of the day. And the reality is when you're working on a construction site or if you're working in a factory environment, if you're working around boilers and moving mechanical parts and large machinery, there's a very real possibility that you can die. Um, if you do not take your personal safety seriously, you could lose your life. And if you do not take the safety of your team seriously, then somebody under your supervision could lose their life. And that is really not something that anyone wants to experience. I worked as a safety officer on the South Coast Switch project, and there was a situation where there was a smaller contractor doing some work for the electrical supplier on the island, and they did not have the necessary supervision procedures in place, and the person was rushing to get pipe in the ground and to get a job done. And they made the cardinal mistake of digging a very large excavation or a very long excavation in sand. And the sand, even though it's probably about 4 to 5 feet deep, it caved in. And by the time his peers got to him, 5 minutes later, he was dead. So that is a very real scenario. Similarly, when I think the Crane Hotel, they had a laborer that fell from the scaffold and he ended up losing arms and legs, and his career came to an end. So there are very serious consequences to be had when you do not take health and safety seriously on a job site.
Thank you very much. So remember, safety is important not only for your safety, but for your team, especially because you're going to be a supervisor. So I haven't seen any questions coming as yet, so we can feel free to move on to lesson two.
That's cool. All right, so lesson two, we're going to be looking at effective communication. And I have three headlines or 3 pointers that we're going to use for our effective communication: clarity, timelines, and consistency. On the clarity, we need to make sure that when we are communicating instructions to our team or when we are receiving information, that the information is clear. The instructions need to be direct to reduce mistakes. You need to make sure everyone understands the task at hand, and you need to explain the hazards and what the expectations of the particular job is. If you are a young site engineer now starting out, like I said earlier, it can be daunting and a bit intimidating to be talking to people who are your parents' age or sometimes who may be your grandparents' age. Talking to persons who are senior to you can be a daunting task. But if you're the person that have been put in the position to deliver information, then you need to deliver that information, as I said there, as clearly as possible. You need to set the expectations of what the particular task is. And everything that I've said there, you basically need to run through so that once you are finished giving out that instruction, that everyone understands what it is that is being required, how long they have to take to get it done, what they need to use, or what tools or methodologies they need to use to undertake the task. So clarity is very important. We have a saying on site that you measure twice and cut once. Basically, you want to make sure that you don't have wastage. You want to make sure you don't have downtime. And on a job site is all about time and money, right? One thing playing off against the next. If you spend too much time, you're going to spend more money. And if you do the job wrong, you're going to spend more money. So clarity is extremely important in making sure that your charges know exactly what it is they're supposed to be doing. If you are responsible for setting out and you set out something in the wrong position and the tradesmen go ahead and set up boxing or something in the wrong position, that has a cost at the end of the day. If it is that you are supposed to be doing a service job on an engine or a boiler or some type, and you do not follow the required steps and you miss a step because you're trying to get ahead quickly, and when you start that up, something goes awry, that could damage that piece of equipment, and that means downtime for the factory, no production, no work, no, basically the factory making money, chances are you won't be making any either. So instructions are very important and clarity of those instructions is very important. Timelines. Information sharing at the right moment, that is before a task begins, or when conditions change, or during a critical update. So as the junior supervisor, as it were, you need to understand the program or schedule of works that you have been given and that you're working to. You need to understand when those deliverables are due and the knock-on effect if they aren't delivered. You then may have to take that information and distill it so that your site trades and your site teams understand what is required of them. You are the professional. You're the person who have gone off to college and have been educated to understand, to analyze, to interrogate certain things. So there's a higher expectation of you in terms of you being able to interpret information from a programming or scheduling point of view. However, the trades that are working for you, they may not have the same level of intellect in being able to interpret that level of information because perhaps they might not have been exposed to it. So you have to take that information and you have to distill it and tell them in layman terms what is expected of them. Okay? That means you have to practice your communication. As Ria said earlier, you have to learn to speak to people. And you have to be sure in yourself, and that takes practice. Whether you stand up in front of a mirror and practice talking, as strange or strange that may have seemed, if you haven't had any opportunities up to this point to either be on a stage or to do public speaking, you're going to be leading people and you're going to be speaking to people. So you need to find a methodology to be able to speak with a level of confidence and that you sound sure and that you know what you're speaking about. So when it comes to those timelines, you have to go back to your team. You have to let them know we need to get this done by this date, and you need to resource accordingly if you need to get certain pieces of equipment, if you need to bring on another team member to get it done, whatever is required, you need to be able to meet that timeline. I mentioned there are condition changes. Now, if you are on a job site working outside, so if you're on an oil rig and there's a storm coming in, production shuts down. If you are on a construction site and a storm comes in and your site becomes flooded and you're digging out a foundation, your job is probably going to stop for a couple of days because you can't work in that water unless it's a job where you have set up for working in water, that your job can potentially come to a grinding halt. So it's understanding how to pivot when you have those challenging conditions presenting themselves because your program is not going to stop and you will have to make up that time. So it's understanding when those weather conditions change. In the example I've given, what you're going to do to attempt to make at the time. And critical updates. You may have a design change and you need to understand how does that design change affect my timeline? And then you have to communicate that information to your team so they understand, okay, that boxing that you were setting up there for the last week, we got to come back down because there's a design change. So that may mean some cussing and some carrying on, but if that is what the job requires, again, it is getting that information across and getting the job done. Consistency, using standard terms and jargon, procedures, communication channels, toolbox talks. Um, when you were at school, or if you're still at school, you may be exposed to certain professional jargon that the industry has. Whether you're doing civil or mechanical, there'll be certain terms and terminology that is used. Um, when you go to the job site, some persons will understand some of that jargon, but the job site, as it were, may have its own jargon, which you now have to learn. And if you're going to work in a foreign country, then you may even have the challenge of a different language to contend with. You may have somebody that is doing that's communicating on your behalf. So you may not be able to pick up those nuances that you would normally be able to do with your own regular language. Um, Even here in Barbados, if you grew up in a nice middle class home and you go to the job site and you work with somebody that is probably from the country, the dialect may be a little strong. You may not even understand sometimes what they're saying. And certainly if you go to work in places like Jamaica, where the dialect is definitely strong, even though you're both speaking English, you will not understand what they're saying. So you need to understand standard terms to be able to communicate effectively, right? And that may mean using the jargon of the profession, using the jargon of the site in that particular culture or that particular location, but finding a means and way of communicating your information effectively. Um, in some instances, why is it important that you know how to sketch? I know a lot of the newer persons who are doing engineering studies, you're drawing with computers and so on, and we've moved away a lot from hand sketching. But when you're on that job site, even though, yes, you may have a tablet and you can sketch on your tablet, you may need to be able to physically sketch on a piece of paper to give somebody an instruction as to how to carry out something or to explain to them visually what it is you're talking about. Sometimes a visual explanation, a diagram, a sketch is the most effective way of getting some information across. And then they can take that piece of paper with them and understand so that they don't forget what it is that you've communicated to them. So you should learn to sketch at least very basic things so that becomes a form of communication that you can utilize on a job site. Finally, there I have toolbox talks. Toolbox talks are short, direct talks that you can have with your team first thing on a morning or first thing before the shift starts. And those talks can focus either on safety, technical matter, or welfare matter. The idea is to deliver the information in a short period of time, and then you would take one or two questions around that information, and then everybody sets off to work after that. That is an effective means, certainly on the SOL job that I spoke about earlier. We had toolbox talks every day before we started the job. If you are working a shift system in a factory, there's normally a handoff. So you would normally have some sort of toolbox talk at the beginning of the shift to understand what the last shift was working on and where you're continuing on. So that exchange of information is important before you can move in to your work for that particular day. All right, so that is bringing us to the end of lesson 2. Are there any questions on communication?
So giving some person some time to do that, of course. But I love questions. So I don't mind leading the floor on this one as well.
That's fine.
Now, I think that going into the field as a young engineer, we also have to be able to appreciate that we're going to have to learn from these people on site. So how can we practice our humility? Because I think sometimes when we are in engineering programs, we tend to build an ego and we think that we know it all and we know everything. So how can we then practice that humility so that when we go on these job sites or we go into the factory and we're working with people in these site areas that they are willing to share all of their knowledge? Because as you can appreciate, but work and practical work, sometimes there's a disconnect.
Yeah, well, I'm going to cover that topic in the next couple lessons that we're going to speak about, Ria. So I will speak a bit to that, and we will explore that a bit more. So I won't answer your question directly now. I'll let as we speak and we discuss, that's going to come out a bit more. Are there any other questions before I move on?
Just checking the chat now. I'm not seeing any as yet, but remember, if you have any questions, I know that Vincent is doing an excellent job at explaining everything. So maybe that's the reason why you might not have any questions.
No
Okay, great.
problem.
We do have a question.
Yeah.
Actually, just came in. Thank you for that. So from Nathan, he wants to know what is jargon essentially. So could you explain on that point some more?
Right. So jargon is terms or terminology that is used for any profession. Every profession has its specific terms or uses of certain words and of language that are specific to that profession. So if I was to think of something along the civil engineering side, and I may say that we are pouring concrete. Pouring concrete, when you think of the word pour, obviously it's like water pouring out. And when concrete is in a liquid state, we will refer to that as pouring concrete. That is something very basic in general, but there are other specific and more technical terms that people will use. I'm not going to get into too much of that now. But basically, Nathan, it is those specific words that are used in every profession, whether it is in engineering, law, and law got a lot of them. Some in doctor, you'll find like in the medical fields and in law, they tend to use Latin terms as well. So it's just one of those things that you come across professionally.
So I really hope that answers your question, Nathan. So just remember, it is just terms specific to a particular field. You might hear certain things, whether it be in medical or engineering, but it's just to that field. If it doesn't, and you have another follow-up question, feel free to do so. Kwame, we see that you have a question. Did you want to unmute your mic and speak, or did you prefer to type it in the chat? Just let me know, please. Sure, feel free to do so. Go ahead at this time.
Hey, good afternoon, Vincent.
Hey, Kwame, how you
Um,
doing?
I'm pretty good, man. I have a question for you.
Sure.
Shout out to all the students in here. Thank you for coming. As you know, I would have graduated and I would have been in a position before supervising. And as you said, supervising individuals that are the age of my dad, you know? And gaining respect was a little challenging because you just come out of school, school don't teach you anything for construction, really and truly, besides how to measure mixtures and so on and so forth. But how do you? I had an altercation where, you know, unfortunately, I had to let go some person. As a supervisor, he's gotta let people go, and
Mhm.
he wasn't too happy on being let go. And we had a slight physical altercation where he himself would have tried to throw a rock or throw some hands. Now, as a young person graduating 25, 24, how do you deal with individuals like that? They might not have the same mindset as you, of course, but how do you deal with individuals like that?
Sure. We are going to get into this a bit more as we progress, but I want to deal particularly with the aspect of the violence that you've just mentioned. Um, yes, when people get bad news, so if they are told that they're no longer going to be working with you, or you have had to lay them off, fire them, send them off the job for your own good, the good of the job, for their own safety, your safety, whatever the situation. But basically, if you've had to part ways and the person chooses to become violent, my advice to anybody is as far as is possible, choose not to engage those persons. If you can, avoid it, do summon the Barbados Police Service and let them deal with it. It's not so much that you're running away and being a coward, but there are certain legal challenges that could arise, and it is always best not to put yourself in harm's way. If you're dealing with a tradesman may have any array of tools at their disposal, from chisels to screwdrivers to God knows what. And what you may think is a simple fist fight may end up in one of you being dead on the ground. As violent, and as terrible as that may sound, it is a very real repercussion of what can happen. So where possible, you would try to de-escalate the situation or hope that there's somebody nearby that may be able to step in and de-escalate the situation on your behalf. But my recommendation to any young person on this call, unless you are a black belt, and even if you are, I would recommend that you seek not to engage unless it's a matter of life and death and you are protecting yourself and you don't have a choice. That would be my initial recommendation, Kwame.
Thank you very much.
All right. But violence is, unfortunately, guys, and for those of you who've never worked on a job site or in a factory setting or in any sort of plant, I mean, violence is one of those things that can occur. You can have people who will have disagreements, not necessarily with you, but with one another. When persons are doing task or job work, for instance, sometimes that can cause tensions to rise. But if they have to get a particular tool and there are no more tools in the container, as it were, and they're pushing to get that job completed, that could create some tension. And then having to de-escalate those tensions on site becomes a reality for you. It's not, I can guarantee you, it's not anything that you're taught in university. Likewise, when I worked on the South Coast Switch project, we had situations where we were working on people's property. And you have situations where you may have householders who can become angry, can become very physical. And again, you have to be able to de-escalate, step away, and stay clear so that you don't, number one, bring yourself in any trouble or get harmed in the process. So situational awareness is important, right? Okay, let's go on to lesson 3. And we're talking about building mutual respect. It's important to build working relationships with the persons you are working with on site. You need them in order to get your job done. So how you speak to them and interact with them is very important. A good way of building that mutual respect is getting to understand the key traits required for the various phases of your job. If you have no experience with a trade, adopt a teachable approach and be open to learn and understand your workers and what it is that basically they're bringing to the table. Meet people where they're at. Never water down what a person does for a living. And you need to be humble, you need to be firm, you need to be fair in your dealings with subordinates and with superiors, because it's not only about managing the persons that are subordinate to you, it's also managing that interaction with persons who are supervising you and how they treat to you as well. You mustn't be afraid to offer a professional opinion, but also be open to listen to alternative approaches, right? Communication, getting to know the people in and around you is so very important. Um, some people go to university and they make the mistake of coming onto a job site and think that they know everything because they just completed an honors degree. I would advise you not to go onto a job site pretending that you know everything, because it's like when you go to get a car license, you do the theory, you have an instructor for, let's say, 6 months, you do the test, you pass. But when you actually get that piece of plastic in your hand, you actually now have to learn to drive, because your instructor is not going to be there next to you all the time. So you have to go on that road by yourself and learn to drive. Likewise, going out onto a job site, you're dealing with people. You're not dealing only with resources, or you just don't see them as resources. You need to see them as people. And if you treat people like people, chances are they will treat you like people too, right? If you are working in different cultures, you're working around different races. These are all things you need to get accustomed to. In engineering, you could be working various parts of the world. You can be working with 10 or 15 different nationalities, and everybody may have their little quirks. But by communicating with people and getting to know people, that is what pulls down those barriers. People may see you come onto a job site, they take one look at you and they make certain assumptions, either because of how you dress, maybe because of how you speak. And there are some people that will seek to test you or challenge you. That is normal human nature, unfortunately. Again, it is getting to know your team, understanding what they bring to the table, getting to know a bit about their trade. So if you don't know anything about what your guys do, spend some time asking questions, understanding what it is they do. You have a steel bender on the job and you are a structural civil person, spend some time with that steel bender because that's one of the most important people on your job. That steel that they're bending, how they erect that steel before the concrete is poured is critical. And then you have to turn around and inspect that. You have to turn around and inspect that steel as well. So by learning and understanding what a steel bender does, that kind of teaches you what you should be looking for when you're doing your inspections to get a better understanding of some of the shortcuts that persons may take, you know. You prepare, or there is a bar bending schedule prepared. You need to be able to go to that job site and have a look at those bends and make sure that what they're doing is correct. Likewise, if you are doing some sort of analysis on an engine, a motor, a boiler, you need to understand what it is you should be looking for. And the guys that work on those engines and those boilers day in and day out, they have a better understanding of those pieces of machinery than you perhaps ever will, because they deal with them on a day-to-day basis. And some of them might have been dealing with them on a day-to-day basis for over a period of years. So it's important that you learn from them, be humble enough to understand and open your brain to hear what people are saying. You need to be teachable and listen. I spent a lot of my time in my early years in construction listening and trying to understand what the persons around me were doing. And there are times when you have to do things a specific way. So you will listen to what others have to say, but you have to do it a specific way. So you listen to them and then you explain, I hear what you're saying, but on this occasion, this is what we have to do. But on other occasions, you may have, let's say, a methodology that you learned in school as being the way to do something. And you may have a tradesman who've been doing this for the last 40 years, and they can recommend a methodology to you that may save time, save money, and give you the same level of effectiveness that you're looking for. So that's where that exchange of information and learning comes. But you have to be teachable, you have to be humble enough, and you should not, I should say, be arrogant, because there are some people that will gladly watch you fail if you come across as too arrogant. So that is a little bit on mutual respect in terms of the guys you will meet on and ladies that you will meet on your job site. Any questions on lesson 3 before we go to lesson 4?
I wouldn't say I have a question, but I really just want to reiterate that point you mentioned just now about people will watch you fail. I think it's so important, and that's why communication is going to be so important as you go onto these job sites. Because when you forget that people are people, and you go and you speak to people poorly, and you don't listen to people, and you're really not taking in the information that they're trying to expose to, especially as a young engineer, people will watch you burn very fast and they will not care. So we really have to remember the same way we want people to speak to us, especially since we're going to have our managers, is the same kind of courtesy that we have to extend to persons when we go out there as well. So they think that's a fantastic point.
Yeah, and respect is earned, right? It's not guaranteed because you have a job position. People will respect your job position, but they may not necessarily respect you as a person. However, if you can get persons to respect your job position and respect you as a person, trust me, the working relationship is so much better. Okay. All
We
right, let's
have
go
one
on.
more question, actually, just
Sure.
before we move on. I just saw it
Uh-huh.
in the chat. We have from Caleb, what would be the best way to handle an arrogant person on the job site?
The best way to handle an arrogant person on the job site is usually to be patient. Um, some people, like I said, can push you because they want to see what you're made of. Whether that is somebody that is supervising you as a senior, or if that's somebody that perhaps you may hear this term, I was doing this for the last 40 years, right? Who is you to come and tell me what to do? That opens up an opportunity to have a conversation about that last 40 years. At the end of the day, you still have to get the task done, and you may need to get it done in a specific way. And that person may be hesitant or maybe being, like we will say, pig-headed, but you need to get a communication across. And if it is that you cannot communicate effectively to that person and get them to do what is required, then you may need to escalate it. And I am not one that will tell you to go on anybody's job site or anybody's factory floor and curse nobody, because that's not me as a person. I've actually had bosses look at me and ask me why I don't, or why I am not more aggressive and that type of thing. And I've told them I don't need to be aggressive to get my job done. But there are some people that think that is the approach that needs to be taken. You will find sometimes, not all the times, that you may have foremen, and the foreman can be a bit rough around the edges, and they're not slight to use language that you may cringe at. Unfortunately, some people seem to respond better to that sort of interaction, but that doesn't have to be your form of interaction. Okay, it's always best to find a means to communicate with people that you don't have to be literally cursing them and carrying them down the road to get something done. And if they're arrogant, you speak fact to them, you deal with them factually, and if it is that you're not getting through with them, then you escalate to somebody that can get through to them. All right. If the person is above you and they're arrogant, then you get to learn a very interesting life lesson. And again, even when you're managing up, you have to find a way and means of communicating with that boss or that supervisor who's above you. And if the situation doesn't improve and an opportunity presents itself elsewhere, then you will do what you have to do. I am not saying that it's every situation you'll be able to win. And certainly if a situation becomes toxic, you would not want to remain in that situation. All right, let's go on to lesson number 4, managing conflict. Now, conflict is inherent with the project, what we call the project coalition matrix, all right? The challenge as a supervisor or manager is to manage that conflict and to use that as a source of creativity rather than a sink of energy. And some of the common flashpoints you will find on a job site will be around schedules, priorities for the use of resources, and allocation of human resources for a project. Now, just to give you a little insight into what I'm talking about when I say the project coalition matrix, which is a term you will find in project management, it's normally speaking to some key components where you have stakeholder identification, knowing who your stakeholders are in a particular project, whether that stakeholder is a tradesman who you need to get your task done or a stakeholder that is external to the project. Interest in a belief analysis, which helps you to determine the goals, the values, and the motivations of each party. So a little psychology here, understanding what makes people tick, basically, right? Influence and power mapping, assessing the ability of each stakeholder and what their effect to the effective outcome of that project may be. So understanding what everybody's role is in the project and basically how to manage those persons. And then relationship mapping. You need to visualize and be, collaborative and competitive or neutral relationships. Understand the type of relationship and the type of characters that you have around you and how to treat to them. And that's something that comes with experience. You're not going to get that in your first year on a job site. You might not even get that in your first 5 years, but that's something that comes with experience. Okay. So those flashpoints that I was talking about, schedules. You are not the only body on the job that has a schedule to meet. It may be 4 or 5 of you at your level, and everybody has specific tasks to execute. And there may only be a certain amount of the next point, or a certain amount of resources in terms of tools, equipment, or humans to throw out a project. And that sometimes can cause tension amongst a plan site team, because everybody's basically pulling from the same group of people and everybody wants to get their thing done and everybody's thing is a priority. So that's where communication with your peers now becomes important. And as the new guy or the new girl on the block, again, you can feel that sense of intimidation of making sure your stuff gets done and other people basically pulling resources from you to get their stuff done and leaving you hanging. So these are common what we call flashpoints where you can get arguments, where you can As Kwame was saying earlier, sometimes you can almost come to blows, but you have to learn how to navigate, and you have to learn, again, that communication skill set comes back. Communication on a job site is key. To get anything done, you need communication. To understand what you are to do, it needs to be communicated effectively to you. So communication is key all around. All right. What I want to recommend is that in terms of conflict, let's look at the next slide. We have some approaches to how to resolve potential conflict. You have we've got 5 points here. So point 1 is to articulate a clear and coherent project mission. There needs to be a clear rallying point for the team. So everybody on the team as I said earlier, needs to know where they fit into that ecosystem and what is expected of them. Everybody has their work cut out for them. But likewise, you need to understand what your colleagues who are also on that team, what they are working toward. Because if it is that you can assist them, at the end of the day, the project wins. It's not about you doing well on your own. You're working as a team. There's no I in team. And on a project team, everybody got to help everybody else, because you're going to have days when some of your human resources may be out sick, or the equipment you were using breaks down. So you may need to get help from one of your colleagues to get on with your work, right? Number 2, argue about facts and not opinions. Argue about facts and not opinions. Sometimes people make things too emotional. They put a lot of emotion into things which can just be factual, right? What are the facts? What do the data or the calculations say? What does the program demand? If you're going to argue something, it doesn't mean you hate somebody. It may mean that you're strident in your point. But people sometimes misinterpret arguments to be that you want to beat somebody, you want to kill somebody, or that, want to fall out. You may just be very passionate about what you are doing. And sometimes people can miscommunicate that passion for anger. It is not that you're angry. It is that you are standing up for something, or you are being very factual. And like I said, keep it about the facts. Don't get personal. Number 3, use a trusted third-party expert to break deadlocks. If you and your colleague cannot come to an agreement for a resource, or if you and the tradesman can't come to an agreement on a process on how something is to be done, have that third party that can step in. So if you're interacting with a tradesman, that may be your foreman who can come into the midst and say, okay, well, this is what the site engineer is saying. This is what the tradesman is saying, and probably bring it together in the center. Or he may step in and tell the tradesman, but this is where we got to do it, how we got to do it in a way that they understand better than probably how you trying to skirt around him. Sound really nice and telling them. He may come in and use some of those choice words that I spoke about earlier to get you things moving, as it were. But it's important to have that trusted third party, somebody that can come in and break those deadlocks when you have challenges. As you go higher up contractually, that third party may be a quantity surveyor. That third party may be one of the consultants who has to step in if you on the contracting side or you on the site side have a disagreement with one of the consultants. You may need somebody to come in to be able to break that deadlock, as it were. The architect may not want to change that detail. You're trying to tell the detail from an engineering perspective, this can't work. And then you need to have that third person that's going to come in that has a bit more experience, that may be able to broker an agreement. Number 4, use decision-making tools that allow both expressions of difference and identify the commonality. There are a couple tools that you can use. So I'm sure some of you at school, they hear about SWOT analysis, where you look at your strengths, your weaknesses, your opportunities, and your threats. That is one approach you can possibly take. Another is something called a rapid framework, which is you use for problem solving, where you look at something that's recommended, what is agreed, what is going to be performed, the input coming in, and then you decide on a point of action, and then you proceed based on that. So there are some methodologies out there that perhaps you can utilize to help make certain decisions. And then number 5, enter into a partnering relationship. The need to work together in the future greatly encourages the spirit of compromise in the present. And what do I mean by that? If you're working in Barbados, and you're working in industry, or you're working on a construction site, chances are you're going to be seeing some of the same people every job. or you'll see those people more often than not because you're living on 166 square miles and there's only so much professionals around. So you run into people all the time. It makes no sense having an acrimonious relationship with a supplier, a vendor, a tradesman, a subcontractor who you know that you may need to use in the future. Find a way to work through the problem, right? Sometimes, yes, if it comes to a point where you have differences that cannot or that are unsurmountable or insurmountable rather, then you may have to part ways for the best, for the betterment of the project and for the betterment of yourself. But if you know you have, let's say this is the only company that does a certain job on the island, you know you gotta use them down the road. Sometimes you gotta eat a little humble pie, and you just need to find a way to be able to communicate and work with those people. All right. So that is the last point we're looking at on resolving conflict. We're coming into the finishing line here now. And that picture there is me with my core team. And the guy starting on this side, the chap with the black cap, he was a mason, he is a mason. The chap next to me on the other side with the head tie, a carpenter. The guy next to him is a jack of all trades, but he's a laborer and he does some of everything. And then this other chap here is a joiner as well. And I call these my core team because when I was managing what was then Jada Improvements, these were the guys that I could count on to pull me out of when we had tight situations, when we had tight deadlines, when we needed to get multiple things done in different locations, right? These are guys I can carry to a location, tell them what I wanted done, and leave them there and know it was going to get done because we had built up that relationship of trust and communication over a period of time. I looked out for them and they in turn looked out for me. And that's what you want. If you're building a site team, whether it is a site team of tradesmen or a site team of professionals, you want to build a level of trust, and that comes through communication and interaction. That's not going to come by just sending people emails or WhatsApps and being demanding and being obnoxious. That comes with genuine and actual communication. So I remember my younger days on a job site, I heard an old tradesman we had by the name of Lion, a very experienced joiner. I looked at a younger joiner that I had put to work with him because I wanted the younger joiner to get better. And he told the gentleman, "What I forget, you ain't learned yet." And that is so very true. You have guys who've been working in the field for 40 years sometimes, and the experiences they might have had are immense. And as a young person coming into the field, you now have to build your profession. You now have to understand. So a lot of things that these guys might have been exposed to over their period of time, you are yet to experience. So you look for those skilled tradesmen and be interested in getting to know some of what they know. You're not going to get to know everything because your job is not to do the trade work that they're doing, but it's to have an appreciation of what it is that they do so that when you sit down to plan a job and you have to determine what skill set to apply or how much of that skill set you need, you have an appreciation of what is required. You have an appreciation because you've gone and stood up and watched the guys erect boxing, or you've gone and stood up on the factory floor to see how the guys pull apart an engine or a motor. You've made the time to make it your business to understand what the guys out there that have to do the hard manual labor, as it were, experience and do. So when you sit down to plan a piece of work, you're not just throwing numbers or dates or times at something because you actually have a genuine appreciation of what you are planning for. Okay. Next point here, there's no substitute for experience. Experience is something that is going to come with time and with you exposing yourself to situations. If you play it safe, it take longer to learn certain things. Sometimes you gotta take some risk, put yourself out there a little bit. Go and learn, go and ask questions, go and see what the guys are doing. And then that you're spying on them, or you don't want them to feel you're spying on them, but you want them to feel that you're genuinely interested in what they're doing. And once people, regardless of how rough and ragged they are, once they know you are genuinely interested in them, their welfare, or what they're doing, when you ask a question, they're not just going to give you a stupid answer. They will actually answer the best way they could. And, so that may not be the most fancy or nicest language that you're accustomed to hearing, but they will answer in the best way that they can. And if you're working in a different culture, again, you gotta appreciate that there may be a language barrier there. You may have to get somebody to interpret for you. But sense isn't always common sense. You will learn a lot of theory and theorems in the university and in classrooms. Understanding how to apply those theorems is what engineering is about. Putting those theorems into action and understanding how they work and understanding what those computations that you sit down and work on do and putting them into action is where the leather meets the road, right? So it is again getting out there and really seeing and understanding what you have designed. If you've designed a bridge, you want to go out there and understand what the steel benders have to do, make sure that the steel benders are doing what they're supposed to do. If you've designed an engine or a motor, you need to be involved in the testing to understand the constraints of what that engine can do. You need to understand the pressures that that pipe can be placed on. If you've designed a certain volume of water to come through that pipe, whatever it is, you need to have an appreciation of what it is you're doing. All right. And moving nicely on to key takeaways from this session, guys. I want you all, I'm assuming, maybe it's wrong of me to assume, but if you are Bajan and using this in the colloquial way, be malicious. Get to know what is expected of you. Get to know your team members. Ask questions. Be willing to learn. When you don't know or understand, there are no foolish questions. Ask the questions, right? There are no foolish suggestions because you're trying to learn. And yes, people may laugh at you and people may try to downplay what you're saying and may try to make you feel foolish, but you have to know why you're asking a question. If you don't learn, if you don't know, don't sit down there like an idiot and pretend that you know when you genuinely don't. Ask the question, all right? You need to learn to have a work-life balance. And this is important to managing the stress that we spoke about earlier. Work is important. It puts food on your table and permits us all to obtain a profession. But you need to make time for yourself and you need to schedule off time. And if that means turning off the phone, you need to turn off the phone because some of you may be given a work phone. When you are on your time, unless your job requires you to be on call, put the phone somewhere where you are not, so you're not finding yourself picking up and looking at it every so often. If you need to turn it off, turn it off. But you need to disconnect. You need to come down because, again, working on a job site, working in a factory, working, sometimes if you're on a rig, you're working a 12-hour shift. You need to find ways of coming right down to be able to allow your body to relax or let your mind relax. And that may look different to different people. That may be involving yourself in physical activity. That may be doing art, reading, listening to music, playing video games. Know what it is that distresses you. Find that thing or those things so that when you have those stressful days that you can find a way to calm down. And that's important if you've got a family because you don't want to take that stress and that anger and whatever else home to them. It's not fair that you take it out on them. Find a way to distress before you go home. Or if you have a routine, when you get home, maybe you sit quietly for half an hour. Family know, all right, well, you just come in, don't disturb you for that half an hour because you coming down. Or you go and take a 30-minute nap or something just so when you get it, you feel refreshed. Find that thing that helps you to distress. If you're at work and the boss tell you something and he's making some on it, making some irrational expectations, as it were. Sometimes you need to walk away, take some fresh air, and come back with a fresh mind. But don't say what may be in your mind at that point in time. That's not the professional way to react. Maybe the architect has told you something on the job site that plainly makes no sense. You don't curse out the architect in front of everybody. That is not the way to go. That's not professional. You are looking to become a professional in your chosen field of study. You have to learn how to interact and deal with people at a professional level. Sometimes that may mean sitting down crafting letters that speak to what you want to speak to without being nasty or without being vile. People will be people. You will not agree with everyone. You will not like everyone you work with, but be professional. Never make it personal. No job is worth your mental sanity and well-being. If it's overbearing, there is nothing wrong with walking away. Life is meant to be dynamic and not static. Okay. And finally, don't be arrogant. Accept you don't know everything. Accept that a person that does not have a degree may actually have something of value to add. Be willing to listen and learn, especially where experience is lacking in a particular situation. All right, so we're on to the question segment. I'm at the end of my chat. Sorry if it was a bit long. I hope I haven't bored you to tears. Those are two of the projects that I'm extremely proud of that I've been part of. The bottom there is the A&E extension, which we did in the heart of COVID. That project went on. That was one of the only construction projects during COVID because it had to be done because COVID was killing people. And then the one at the top is the monument, which my colleague and I designed. So those are my two heartstrings of a project that I've got there at the end. So I am open for some questions. As I said in the thing just now, there are no stupid questions. Don't be shy. Everybody here may have different experiences or maybe at different levels. Please do ask. Use this opportunity, guys, and the opportunities that Ria is going to bring to ask questions. These are the times to ask questions, all right? So Ria, the floor is open. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Vincent. So far, it's been fantastic. I've been learning a lot, even for myself as a young engineer. And I really hope that those persons who are currently online are they're gaining a lot of information. If you have any questions, now is a great time to ask that question so that way you can walk away today feeling like you've really gotten everything out of Vincent. Now is the time to pick his brain so that way you can reduce any chances of any challenges in the future. So we have a question here from Tajiri. How can you differentiate friends from workmates? I find this is a hard thing to overcome. How would we answer that, Vincent?
Well, um, I don't know how old Tajiri is. I think right at this point in your life, you've probably navigated this a bit, but you have work acquaintances, you have acquaintances in life. For me personally, I do not call acquaintances friends. I have acquaintances and I have friends. Friends to me are people that I am totally at ease with. They know me, I know them very well. Friends for me are persons that I can put my trust in. Friends for me are persons that can tell me the hard thing even when I don't want to hear it, because I give them that authority in my life to speak into my life and tell me if I'm doing something stupid or if they think I'm doing something stupid or give me advice or pick me up when I'm feeling down. For me, those are friends, and I don't have a lot of them. I could probably count them on one hand. Acquaintances, got tons of them. Every job site you work on, you're going to get acquaintances, people that you interact with daily. And you can have very good acquaintances. You have very good working relationship with them, but sometimes when that job is finished, that's the last time you will see them. You're not necessarily going to see them outside of work. You're not necessarily going to invite them to your house, so you're not necessarily going to go out and party with them. So there's that differentiation sometimes that creates itself. You have that working relationship at work, and sometimes that's where it remains. You keep it professional. If you are a young male and you are working around females, I would encourage you to keep it professional. And likewise for the females, keep it professional. Do not allow yourself to become entangled with senior staff and these type of things because it can create challenges down the road. So it is important sometimes to have that boundary around you. And if it is that you have an acquaintance at work and you decide that that person becomes a friend, that's entirely up to you and them. If you can build that level of trust with them and you guys have a relationship outside of work, that develops into a friendship, then so be it. But there's not everybody you work with that's going to be your friend. At least that's my perspective.
Fantastic information. And of course, you really have to make sure that you're watching people. I know some people, when they go to work, they've already made the decision that nobody at work can ever be my friend because sometimes people can say they're your friend, and then what they do is that they take your information and whatever you've told them in confidence, they go back and they use it against you. Or some people, depending on where they are in terms of their career, if they now become your boss, then it becomes difficult. So you always have to make sure you're watching and, look on the ear and decide the caution. That's very important. So we're opening up the floor for any more questions. Now is the time to get your questions in for Vincent. And as we are waiting for those questions, I just want to remind persons we're going to post two links shortly. Some of you may have joined this link, especially for the young students, because I've been trying, and the Engineering Association has been trying to reach out to students and, really making sure that we can bridge that gap. A lot of the information that Vincent has given us tonight is going to allow you to start to bridge that gap prematurely in terms of how you have to shape your mindset, how you have to be approaching, how you're going to be working with people, how you want to make sure that you are watching how not only are you speaking to people, but how people speak to you, the way that you want to make sure that you are learning in the classroom and that you're starting to build your communication skills from now. He said that you don't have to shout and scream and curse at people to really get your point across. And if he's been in this industry for so long, we can see that that's a testament of the truth. Yes, when you go on certain sites, that's something that you're going to see and you're going to experience it. But that does not mean that it has to be you. You determine your attitude and you determine how you're going to speak to people and how people are going to interact with you and build those relationships. And once you're building those relationships with your team, and you're looking out for your team because, of course, people are definitely going to want it to be as reciprocal as possible. You're going to find that when you build that relationship and you're looking at your communication, you're going to see your career grow more and more. So as we are waiting for any more questions, again, look in the chat for that student outreach. You can share it with any of your student friends, whether it's sixth form, BCC, SJPI, UE, and it could be university overseas as well, because at the end of the day, Vincent went overseas and studied, and he's here back in Barbados. So don't limit
I can met somebody here miserable now. Sierra World, what question you got for me?
that.
Uh, Sierra is my mentee. Miss Burrow, what questions do you have for me, ma'am?
Hi, good night, everyone.
Good night.
Good night.
I would have recently learned about an organization under the name of FIDIC. Not sure if you know about it.
Yes, I do.
Okay, so how have you, as a project manager in Barbados, a small country, how has that helped you as an international organization?
Well, what FIDIT is an international organization that prepares contracts, various forms of construction contracts. It is a European form of contract, which is used primarily on large construction projects, particularly World Bank and IDB like to use the FIDIT form of contract. It's very specific. It assigns responsibilities under the contract to certain posts within the contract. Because it's French in nature, it refers to the engineer. That term engineer in a European sense has a very broader concept perhaps than it does in the English or the American sense. And it assigns quite a bit of responsibility to the engineer under the fitted form of contract. So it is an international collection of contracts which are utilized for large civil works or large projects. There are other international forms of contracts, such as the Joint Council Tribunal, JCT. There's NEC. Locally, there's the BIA form of contract. So there are a couple of forms. I'm sure in Trinidad, where you're studying, Sierra, they may have their local forms of contract on the architects and the engineers there as well. So it's just another tool in the toolbox. And like I said, you would normally find those forms of contracts on very large projects. You will not find a fitted form of contract on a simple or medium range, like a house or a set of apartments or anything like that. Hardly ever. You will find a fitted contract, something like the sewage system or the project that the government here is getting ready to launch, where you have international funding. The funding agency may choose to use a fitted form of contract. You will find it in those type of contracts, those type of projects particularly. I hope that answers your question.
Yes, I would also like to follow up on, okay, so what other organizations would we use instead of FIDIC, since it's used for large projects? So what
Yeah,
would we use for these smaller projects?
so like I mentioned just now, there's something called JCT Pharma Contract JCT Joint Council Tribunal or something like that. I can't remember. But they have forms of contract that you will find for medium range projects and smaller projects that you can, if you can dig into those, you will find contracts that are not as onerous and do not have the MOCA requirements that the FIDIC contract will have. I think the FIDIC contract actually is color coded, if I remember correctly. So JCT, NEC, BIA locally here in Barbados, I guess the BIA equivalent in Trinidad, they will have contracts that are not as onerous that you can use for smaller developments in the area. They have mid-range contracts which deal with minor works. You have civils contracts which deal with primarily civils works. And then you will have the larger pharma contract, which will deal with larger and more complex forms of work. All right.
Yes, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
No problem, Sierra. Any other
Great
questions?
question,
All right.
Sierra.
I need to add some other people start calling some names.
We have one more question in the chat from Pierre, and his question is, as a new person in the workforce, it sometimes is challenging in adapting around busy schedules, and the older employees actually gatekeeping because they feel that you're now a threat to replacing them. How do I navigate as a junior and potentially seek a mentor in the workforce?
As I said earlier, it's challenging. There are people that may see you as a threat to their job, and my recommendation to you is to do your best, whatever position you're placed in, to do your best and perform to the best of your ability. Um, if persons choose to want to gatekeep, as the term that you use, then they will have their reasons why they want to do that. Sometimes you perform well, and the persons you want to see performing, or for them to see you performing, may not see it because, as you said, people may be keeping your light under a bushel. But I can guarantee you that on a job site, there are other people coming and going, and other people will see talent when they see it, and you may get another offer in another place. But because you're now starting out, there's still a lot to learn, a lot of attitudes you'll have to get accustomed to, and some of them are not always pleasant, unfortunately. My recommendation to you at this point in time is to do your best. Make sure you understand what it is that is required of you, and to do your best, apply yourself, and to perform. In terms of seeking a mentor, if depending on the size company you are in, once you are settled there for a period of time, if there's somebody in that organization, so if you're doing civil engineering or civil engineering related field or mechanical engineering related field, and you have a senior and you have a decent working relationship with them, you could approach them and ask them if they'll be interested in being your mentor. Another way around it is if you are not a member of the BAPE, we do occasionally have socials or interactions like what we have here tonight, where you can start to get to know other people within the industry that you work with, and you can reach out perhaps to one of them once you get comfortable, or reach out through BAPE and let us know that you are potentially looking for a mentor in an area, and we can probably put it out there to some of our members who are registered to see if anyone would be interested in taking on a mentee. I see Ray, who's our president, has his hand up, so he will want to add something to this discussion. Ray, over to you.
Thanks, Vincent. Thanks, Maria. Great presentation so far. I just wanted to add to Vincent's comment as it relates to mentorship, just to advise that the BAPE is looking to actually roll out a formal mentorship program sometime this year. So if, as Vincent was saying, you don't have an older engineer in your organization, or you can't find one, you could reach out to the BAP, listen out for when the mentorship program is going to be rolled out, and be a part of that so that you could be formally mentored. So just wanted to add that to your comments. Thanks again.
Thanks for that, Ray. So yeah, as the organization responsible for our professionals, especially if you're young, you're probably a graduate and you're probably wondering about why I need to affiliate myself to a professional organization. One of the reasons is for what Ray just said. You may be looking for a mentor and we may be able to literally give you a hookup in that regard. But also you want to be interacting with persons in your field. When you have a social is more than just going and standing up with a drink and talking nonsense. If you go to a social and there's a senior person there, who you know is a senior in your particular area of study, go and pick the brain, go and ask some questions. Um, how did you do this? How did you get to the level of success that you've gotten? What were your pitfalls? Don't be shy. When those opportunities present themselves, or when opportunities like this present themselves, do not be shy. Ask questions. If you need to position yourself at the front of the classroom, position yourself at the front of the classroom. Don't be shy. Ask the questions. Yeah. Any
So
other questions? Yeah.
we're having some questions rolling in now. So we're gonna start with Aaron. We have here, what is the best way to obtain internships?
Sierra World was the best way to opt in. I'm not gonna do that to you. I'm being naughty. The best way, my recommendation to persons that I mentor, I always tell them, especially if you're at university or BCC, at this stage, you really don't have anything that an employer wants. I'm sorry to tell you that may sound a little harsh, but that is the real truth for true, right? You don't have any skill set that an employer necessarily wants or needs at this point of your development. So the incumbent is upon you to find that employment. And sometimes um, finding that employment may mean being bold, may mean putting on some decent clothes and going to office, introducing yourself to the persons there and said, can you um, allow me to come in for 2 weeks or a week just to experience? You don't need to pay me. I would just like to have that opportunity to get my feet wet. Now, Ray runs the company. If you approach Ray with that sort of boldness, Ray may say, well, I really don't have the position for you, but because you were so bold in how you approach, Ray might say, well, I can find something for you to do for a week and fit you in. That is more beneficial to you than it is for Ray. It's probably more of an annoyance to Ray because he now has to find somebody to kind of help you along and show you how to do things and so on. For you, you are actually getting your feet wet. You're getting in there. You're understanding what it is you've been learning in the classroom. So what I always tell my mentees is that pay, or the level of pay at this stage when you're at school, is really not that important. Getting your feet wet, getting in the door, getting that looking, even if it's 2 weeks, a week, whatever it is, that is what is important. The other approach, which is the more conventional approach, you are at UWI now. We are in the month of March. You should have already sent out your job letters looking for a summer job. If any students hearing my voice here world on this call who have not yet sent out the job letters, I know some of you may be doing your midterm exams or whatever else, but as soon as you're out of that, get those letters out, because I can tell you the organization I work for, they sent around today basically a memo to all managers asking, well, how many interns are you wanting for your section this coming summer? So companies are already aligning themselves and preparing themselves for the interns that are coming. You need to get your application letter, your CV put together, your cover letter, and send it to those places that you would like to have an opportunity to work for during the summer. Some people may say, well, we can take you for 2 weeks, in which case, if that is a firm, if you're sure you can get a 2 week at some place, you may need to write to more than one place and hope that you get another 2 week looking at another location. Like I said, the ideal scenario, if you can stagger it, would be to get a little time in a design office and some time on an actual job site. So my recommendation, prepare a proper CV, have somebody senior to you, or if you have access to some sort of guidance counselor or person that guides students in that way that can look over the CV, or if you have a person that you trust who is older, who may be in the field that can look it over to advise you. The point is, put together that CV properly, get that cover letter prepared properly, make sure it don't have no green verbs or no, I know we like to use a lot of WhatsApp language, but when you're writing, the language is standard English still. Send the information out. And if you gotta send out 20 because guess what? Everybody else doing it and everybody else want the job that you're looking for. So send out the CVs from now. If the CV thing don't work, as I said, be bold, put on some business clothes. And when I say business clothes, I ain't talking about a pants that pull down below your backside and that you look like you're going to affect, but that you look like you're serious and you're looking for employment. And go and knock at somebody's office door, ask to speak to the senior engineer or the principal, and basically say, well, I'm a student, I am home on leave, and I would really appreciate the opportunity to have a week or 2 weeks at your establishment to appreciate what the job entails. I am not necessarily looking for pay at this point in time. That's the extreme scenario. The other scenario, the more conventional one, you will probably get some sort of stipend if you're being employed. That's my recommendation. And that has worked for a couple of people in the past that I have recommended it to, including some
Thank you
harder
so
people that
much.
are on this call. Yeah.
So you've been tackled tonight, so I hope you remember this information.
All
And
right.
Aaron, I hope that answers your question as well. So remember to start early and do everything that you can for
Yeah.
those internships because you have to put in the work for what you want. No one is
Yeah.
going to hand it to
The,
you.
the, the time is now,
Uh,
guys.
mhm.
There are companies that have formal internship programs in Barbados. If you're in Trinidad, I'm sure they will have likewise down there. Don't think you need to rush back home. If you have an opportunity that you can work for a couple of weeks in Trinidad, please take it. Um, the point is to get that work experience, like I said earlier. The big companies here that will normally take in interns on the engineering side will be places like Sol, Rubis. You may be successful in getting looking at CO Williams. I know the central bank takes in people. They have a whole set of departments, so it will be under the facilities department. We have one of our registered engineers. She's the director of the facilities department there now. Um, public workers where I work, they'll be also taking interns in the facility side. So larger companies will normally have internship program where they're taking a certain amount of students every year. Smaller companies, not so much. You just hope that you get a look in. And it also depends with the smaller companies on the amount of work they may have on at the particular point in time. So if you write to a design office and they have a lot of work coming in and they really can do the extra work, you probably will get an opportunity there. Likewise, if you write to a contractor who has a lot of work going on and they think you can offer them something that they can use, they will probably take you in for the summer. All right.
Fantastic. And we're gonna make the questions are rolling in, but we're gonna have to start capping off at some point. So the last question that we see in there is definitely gonna be the last question for tonight. But again, I just want to remind you, do not forget that link within the chat, not only to give feedback on the webinar tonight, but to also share with any students who you think could benefit from these types of webinars. So on to the next question. As brief as we possibly can, we have it from Saskia. I hope I pronounced that correctly. So this semester we are covering contracts and law and management. Can you explain or break down how contracts function and the things that happen before and after they play their role, and how does law and management play into it?
Ooh, you want to answer for a question you got for assignment. So let me give you the Cliff Notes version. What is a contract? A contract is an agreement between two persons or two entities, either for a set of work that has to be done in terms of construction or engineering works, right? You and I will agree formally through a contract that you will execute work in a particular manner that I have prescribed at a particular time and for a particular fee. So a contract is very specific. It sets out what it is or the service that is being requested. It sets out what the expectation of performance is. So the contract will spell out what and how you're expected to perform. And it sets out the fees or the fee scale that is required or expected under that contract. There are various types of contract, obviously, and there are various types of contracts for various situations. If we are talking on the civil engineering side, you may have civil engineering specific contracts, which will cover civil works in its purest form. And what do I mean by that? Civil works in its purest form may refer to pipe work, doing pipelines, doing roadways, doing aqueducts, doing bridges, doing culverts, those type of things. Land moving, land shaping, building dams. Though that is civil engineering in its purest form. If you have a building contract, it may be a bit more broad-based where it may mention some of the civil works that has to be executed as part of that building contract, but it also goes into the actual building and what is required for that, what is expected of you. Once you sign that contract, then you are required to deliver upon what you have agreed to. So whatever is in that contract, the body of that contract, once you sign it, you have agreed to do those things. Likewise, the person who have contracted you have made certain promises to you as well. So that contract under law keeps both parties accountable to one another. I, as the person wanting the work done, have contracted you to build a doghouse for me. The expectation from you is once you finish build that doghouse is that you will be paid the amount of money that was agreed before the contract was executed. When I say executed, I don't mean it killed somebody, but I mean that you've brought the contract into effect. All right. Once you have that contract, which speaks to the requirements or the duties of both the contractor and the person who have done the contracting, then if that has to go to law, the judge will look, or the arbitrator, if it goes to arbitration, will look at the terms of the contract, see where the contract has failed, if it has failed, and then speak to those matters and seek to have a resolution, either in favor of one or the other party, or in terms of dispute resolution, if you can come to agreement and a settlement. I hope that covers a little bit of what you were asking.
Fantastic. The second last question, we talked about safety being important. How often should you attend safety training workshops or update my certificates so that they stay up to date? Sorry.
A lot of safety training, depending on the level you're doing it at, there's certain aspects of safety. So let's say first aid, where you would normally be required to do some sort of refresher every year or every 2 years. They normally don't go past the 2 year period because first aid is not something you're going to use every day and you will forget unless you're a paramedic or you're working in the medical area or unless you got real people getting hurt on your job site. You're not going to use your first aid very often. So doing things, the compressions and so on, probably every year or every other year, you'll be required to refresh that particular certification depending on the type of safety training you're doing. So if you're doing confined space training, again, that type of certification may only last for a year. What do I mean by confined space training? If you have to work inside a vessel, or like a fuel vessel, a bunker vessel, an oil vessel, inside an oil tank, a fuel tank, and you would appreciate for industry, these things can be large, but you're going into a confined space where they may want to be one way in and one way out. Going into a manhole is considered working in a confined space. So there's specific training for working in those scenarios, and those would normally last about a year. So different forms of safety training will tell you how long it lasts for and how long the certification lasts for. If once that runs out, then you are no longer certified in that particular area and you will have to do some sort of refresher. Okay.
Fantastic. And the final question before we wrap up, what would be the difference between working for a private company versus a government entity when you're working as an engineer?
Okay, I gotta give you the correct answer, not the answer I want to give you. So What is the difference between working for a private entity and a government entity? One would like to think that there really should be no difference. However, I will say that normally working for a municipal or a government entity, they will have a lot more controls, rules in place because you're dealing with public money. Once you're dealing with the public purse, there are a lot of controls, a lot of systems, a lot of paperwork, a lot of bureaucracy that normally comes into play because there's a lot of accountability for that public money, or there should be a lot of accountability for that public money. So there may be certain expectations of you as a government engineer that a person working in private practice may not have. There may be a lot more paperwork, a lot more reporting that you may have to do, a lot more testing, because also what you will find sometimes is that with government projects, they should be done in such a way that they are utilizing the various laws that exist. So if you have a building code, one would expect or should expect that a government project would be acquiescing to the construct of a building code and trying to do what is right. So that may require you to do testing on materials, testing on various products, because you may need to have basically the paperwork to show that what you're using meets the specified requirements of certain things. On the private side, it can be a bit more relaxed. However, depending on the form of contract that you're working on, you may also have some very strict guidelines to follow. So as I said earlier, if you're working on a petrochemical project, if you're working for Sol or one of them, they have, like I said, very high health and safety requirements. So the health and safety requirements on those particular jobs may be high. If you are working on a job that is near water or in soil that is going to be saturated and likely to cave in, there will be very, or there should be very strict guidelines in and around how you do that type of work. Somebody earlier asked about a FIDIC contract. If you are doing a FIDIC contract, if you're doing World Bank or IDB work, or you're doing work for CDB, those projects are very heavily, or usually very heavily regulated, in that you have to have certain financial requirements in place in terms of payments and receiving payments and making payments. You have to have safety and health requirements in place to meet their guidelines, and they will send people out to check and verify that what you say you will do is what you're doing. A lot of these large entities like the IDB, the CDB, the World Bank, because you are spending their money, they need to make sure that what you're spending their money on is being done. So when they fund a government project, even though you may be working for a private contractor, if you're working for a private contractor on an IDB project, you may have some very strict guidelines that you have to follow. So I think in a nutshell, that is how I would offer to answer that question, Ria.
Thank you so much again, Vincent. I know I don't have to think, but I know that tonight truly was valuable in terms of the information that you have offered. I thank you for really sharing that with all of us today. And I really hope that everyone, those who are still here, you can really take this information and apply this not only if you are currently working, but as you leave school, you can apply this when you leave school. And remember that you're still dealing with people now when you're in school. So even though you may not be actively within a workplace at this present moment, that doesn't mean that you can't start to build the skills that you're going to be able to use within the workplace. So please remember that. Thank you again, Vincent. Just
Sure.
before we close off, I just want to highlight some of the other events that we're going to be having later on. So first of all, I want to ask for some volunteers on our webinars. I would have sent out some information to students to get an idea of what they're studying. And we currently have some interest in terms of industrial engineering, mechanical and manufacturing, electrical and computer science, and environmental engineering. So if you happen to be falling in any of these categories, or you know anyone that might truly be able to contribute to really make all of the young engineers, budding and current, really progress. We don't want to gatekeep anything. So if you know any of those information or those persons, please be sure to send it to our way, whether it is in the chat. Some of you can reach out through engineers@caribsurf.com, or you can call the office at 429-6105 if that is your preferred way. We also have a career showcase coming up at Harrison's College, Tuesday, March 31st. It's basically during their lunchtime. And if you are an alumni or you want to go ahead and just expose more students to opportunities in engineering and let them really see what engineering is like in the real world, we encourage you to reach out and let us know so that way we start younger and younger and we can guide students as best as we possibly can. So we don't only have to learn and, as we know, we say all the time, swim in the deep end. We don't want to drown. If we can learn as much as we can and early as we can, that is always best. We also have the big webinar. This is what we're doing right now is mainly for the students and the younger engineers, but the general big webinar is we're going to have something on the 31st of March as it relates to Nikon fibers for concrete additives. And coming up on March 14th, the space at the top, fel.developments, is the Instagram person that would have posted it. We're looking for any persons that want to do a presentation there. So again, I want to thank you all for coming out tonight. Don't forget to fill out that feedback form. Don't forget to share it with persons and reach out to the association whether you have any questions, whether you have any feedback, whether you want to volunteer and continue to make the association better. Thank you so much, everyone. And thank you again, Vincent, and for the support team here on the tech. And have a fantastic night, everyone.
Thank you.